Good morning and welcome to this second session of the morning. I'm Victoria MacDonald and I'm the Health and Social Care Editor for Channel 4 News, but your host for today. And with me is Jill Thompson, who is Chair of Breast Cancer Now. And I'm sure you have all heard of it. But just by way of introduction, Jill was a chartered accountant, worked as an investment banker, an investment manager, an advisor at Citizens Advice for 8 years. But more pertinently, I suppose, was her own experience of breast cancer that she said motivated her to join Breast Cancer Care's board as treasurer in 2016 and then 2019 chair of the charity. So if you don't mind me asking what your experiences were and what was it that prompted you to go out and help with the charity?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I was diagnosed after a routine screen, and very luckily for me, immediately found the services of breast cancer care and used them extensively. And one of the things that people that do find us and use us always say to us is that, gosh, I really wish I'd found you at the beginning of my journey and earlier on in my journey. And so I was fortunate that I did. And having gone through the whole breast cancer treatment experience, which for me was chemotherapy and then a full mastectomy with reconstruction, and then on to tamoxifen, I felt after about a year of that I was ready to give back. And for me, with my background and my financial experience, joining the board was a very appropriate thing to do. And I found it enormously rewarding. And then 3 years after that, we merged with Breast Cancer Now as was. So we brought together all of the care and information services that Breast Cancer Care were doing with all the research that Breast Cancer Now were doing to create a, if you like, one-stop shop for anyone affected by breast cancer, which means we do everything from start to finish. So we provide support for now and hope for the future. And ironically, having been an investment banker and working on mergers, that experience also came to play in actually doing a merger and living through a merger afterwards.
Just while I'm thinking about it, what did you think when you saw the news today about the cancer waiting times?
Well, we've been hearing about that for years, to be honest. We are very fortunate that our board has a number of clinical professionals on it. We have oncologists, we have a very senior consultant nurse, we have research scientists, and we have radiologists. So we have been hearing for a very, very long time from the coalface what's happening, and hearing our oncologists saying to us, we are prescribing chemotherapy and then our patients cannot get it because they cannot get a place in the chemo ward. So yeah, we're really well aware of it. It certainly wasn't a surprise to us.
I wanted to talk specific. I was saying to Jill actually before that I was at a party on Friday and was talking to somebody who had breast cancer, and she was raving about Breast Cancer Now. And one of the things that she was talking about very specifically was your Here For You. Can you describe it?
Absolutely. Here For You is a service that we created in 2019. And the whole point of Here For You is that if you, as a professional, clinical professional, working in breast, have a patient that you would believe would benefit from the wide range of services that we provide, what we ask you to do is to make a one-stop referral to us. Pass your patient on to us for that side of the care. We know that you're working incredibly hard and under immense pressure to deliver the clinical side of things, and we are there to help that patient and that patient's family and context deal with all the other bits, all the emotional impacts, all the information requirements that they have. So Here For You, we're already working in 60 trusts, and we'd love to be in all the trusts in the UK to enable you to do that referral. We then take it from there. We will speak directly to that patient. We will offer the full remit of services that we have. And then obviously it's up to them what they like. Not everybody wants everything, what sort of service we can help them with. And I think there's loads of them, and we have a great booklet here, which is on our stand on B6, if you'd like to go and have a look at it, which details all of them, and obviously it's all on our website too. But some of the things we do, and I know, Victoria, you were talking about your friend who is using our service called Someone Like Me. Someone Like Me is great. It basically, you as a patient, you have a specific type of breast cancer, specific circumstances, very personal to you. We have a huge range of volunteers who will be people like me who used our services, found them incredibly valuable, and want to give that little bit back. We train those volunteers. We then choose an appropriate volunteer for your patient who will then be able to speak to them directly and ask all those very personal, very pertinent questions that will come up and will be totally relevant, and which that patient volunteer will be able to answer. And that sort of personal connection, that service, which you as professionals working in the clinical setting will not have time, much as you'd love to be able to answer all those questions, you won't always have time to do them. And we are offering you an additional partner who can help you with that. And it was something, I didn't use Someone Like Me, I used the information services, and I used our forum, which is also running through the website. And for me, I was one of those people that wakes up in the middle of the night. I'm awake at 3 or 4 in the morning, and all these questions are buzzing around my head. I don't know the answers. I want an answer now, and I can find it that way. And there's always someone on that forum who's also up at 4 in the morning, funnily enough, also mulling things over, also able to help you.
I remember when my sister had breast cancer, and at one stage realizing that as much as her husband was supportive, as much as I was supportive, she actually needed to talk to somebody else because we could not totally understand what she was going through. And at the time, I suggested she went to a Maggie's centre, even if it was just to have a massage, but also to talk to somebody. And then she subsequently, people come to her and say, well, for instance, how did you react to tamoxifen? You know, it's those little questions, and sometimes you think you're going mad because your feet are aching, and it turns out that's a normal side effect.
Exactly, that's exactly it, yeah. And we also find that a lot of patients, being women at a certain stage in their lives, feel guilty about worrying and having issues that they can't resolve. And they've got families, they've got networks. They don't want to overload them. They don't want to be constantly seen as that person with a problem, with an issue. So it's great for them to go to somebody who's outside of their own personal close network, someone who can answer them and does get it, really does understand what they're going through.
Yeah, actually, I felt like that going through fertility treatment, where I was boring my friends silly, so I went and found somebody else who knew exactly what it was like to be injecting yourself every day. I am also interested. So you said you're in 60 trusts, did you say? What is the barrier to the other trusts? What are you coming up against?
I think we're coming up against the ability to get approval to do this. So we are really much here today making an appeal to those people at a senior level in the NHS in those trusts. Your breast care nurses are working their socks off trying to deal with their patients. Please enable this service so that you can give them that bit more help, and they can focus on what they need to be focusing, and we are there to help you. I mean, we have our information booklets in way more than 60 trusts, and that's how I discovered breast cancer care, because at that awful moment when they tell you you really do have it, and they sit you in that little room, which we used to call the crying room because that's what you do there, and they hand over the leaflet and they say, I know you're not taking this in, I know you're looking at me and it's not going in, but here it is written down for you. These are the key facts. These are people you can talk to. These are nurses. We have this fantastic Ask Our Nurses service where you can ring up and you will speak to a qualified nurse who's been a breast care nurse in the NHS, or who often still is a breast care nurse in the NHS, and she will answer those questions and she'll give you the information that you need. So not only do we want our information booklets in your breast units, we want you to be enabled to do here for you.
Another issue that just came to mind actually was those moments when after you've been discharged and you feel a little niggle, a little pain, and you think, well, I'm not going to bother the NHS because they're really busy, but I'm a bit worried. And I know certainly at the Royal Marsden, which was where my sister was, they had a nurse you could ring up and she'd say, that's normal, or no, come in and we'll see you, which was a huge amount of relief, because a lot of patients don't want to bother their GP. They don't want to ring the hospital and say, you know, it may be something, it may be nothing.
That's absolutely right. I mean, signs and symptoms of secondary breast cancer are a huge element of the work that we do, because so often, unfortunately, a lot of the time it is nothing, but occasionally it's not. And like all cancers, the sooner you identify those, the sooner the treatment can commence. Clearly, with secondary breast cancer, we're not going to find an ultimate cure, but we can keep people alive for longer and living better for longer. So having someone to talk to about that is vital. And again, yes, you can call our Ask the Nurses service. Equally, if you form those networks already, which you may well have done through connections with us, you'll have a group of people that you've met through our services where you'll be able to share those niggles and those worries.
How useful do you think the debate has been around partnership working? So we are seeing a lot more of the charities and the voluntary sector being used really well as part of the healthcare system. Where do you fit into that? And
I think from our perspective, there's great work being done on partnerships, but the focus tends to be on local charities, local community-based charities, because that is where physically people are able to make the connections and they can see directly where they will get the benefit. As a UK-wide charity, perhaps we don't fit into that box as well as we might, and therefore we're not automatically a port of call, but we would very much like to be.
what are you doing? How are you having that conversation?
Well, very much. Our points of contact in breast units do tend to be focused on the breast care nurses themselves, and we have a nursing network. We provide support to them. We help them with training and additional professional qualification requirements, etc. So that's one way in. And the other way in, we have worked, in fact, since the early 2000s with cancer alliances, a number of the cancer alliances. And we have something called a service pledge, where we work with the alliance, so we work both with the clinicians and with patient reps to try and improve services for breast care. I think what we find is once we're in, we have a connection and people realize what we can offer, then it's relatively easy. It's just getting in there and making those connections.
Actually, can you flesh out the service pledge a bit more? Because I've got the blurb here in front of me. It's very interesting because I haven't heard of anything similar.
No, it's the only system-wide pledge for breast services, and the theory behind it is that you sit down with the people, the clinicians working on breast care, and you get patient reps, and you just find often little ways that you can improve the service. You as a clinician get feedback from your patients as to ways that might be improved. Their, patient journey experience within the treatment centres might be improved, and then it's a pledge amongst the whole of the hospitals working within the cancer network that we will try and change our processes. We'll make improvements. We'll try and make things better.
What we also know, I suppose, is that in some areas cancer services are better than in others. You're lucky if you live in certain parts of London. You might not be so lucky if you live in a rural area. I mean, I know we have somebody here talking about, who we were talking earlier about what's happening in Greater Manchester. What do you do when you see a service that really isn't giving the patients what they deserve?
We as a charity, we can only at that point try and demonstrate what we have seen as best practice elsewhere.
I mean, you must see it.
Yes, we do. But it is difficult for us because we are not the people on the ground who are actually doing the work. We can only do as much as we can to, if you like, offload elements of the work that the clinicians are doing to push that over to us so that we can free up their time, enable them to do more. But unfortunately, we can't change the structure. We can't improve staffing levels, et cetera, which is obviously where the key problems are.
Does it worry you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I was diagnosed at a point where I got absolutely fantastic care from the NHS from start to finish. I have no criticism at all. I don't think if I was diagnosed now, I would get as good a care as I got then. And that is really worrying. And as you'll all be aware, breast cancer is increasing. 1 in 7 women in the UK will develop breast cancer. It's a huge number of women and some men who are experiencing this. And we want everyone to get excellent care, and sadly, that's not necessarily happening.
Can you give me an example of, I want to sort of put it in, put the patient in front of us. Just give me an example or another, because you've given some already, of what you are. You're the patient, you're ringing you up.
Yeah.
What would it be like? What
Oh.
would they be saying to you, and what would you be giving back
Okay.
to them?
Okay, well, personal story. I sadly had a very close friend I was at school with who developed secondary breast cancer just before my primary diagnosis. She survived a very long time with secondaries. She survived 11 years, which is absolutely fantastic, but sadly died last year. But some way through her journey, she was undergoing one of her many rounds of chemotherapy. And at that point, she developed really bad mouth ulcers, really bad. She couldn't eat, she was in a lot of pain. And she just didn't know where to go for a solution. She'd asked her oncologist, who had said, well, there is this standard treatment, and of course that wasn't working for her. She'd been to her GP, who was massively sympathetic and said, look, I can't think of anything to give you. And at that point, she called our helpline, and our nurses, because of their experience, actually did know of a very quite unknown drug which worked. She was able to go back to her GP and say, look, I've been recommended this, can I take this? And GP said, absolutely, I'll prescribe it, and it worked. And that is just one small way of helping her, obviously, but also helping both her GP and her oncologist, who now are aware that this drug is around. And nobody knows everything. No one can know all of the drugs that are available.
Yeah, no, that's a very good example. And it actually made me think, too, about the enormous number of innovations and the enormous progress that has been made in treating breast cancer. How often are you getting calls saying, I've heard about this treatment, NICE hasn't approved it, but, can I get on a trial? What do you do in those circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, campaigning for access to new drugs is very much part of our DNA. We have a huge campaign at the moment about Enhertu, which is a drug specific to women who have HER2-low breast cancer, secondary breast cancer. And we have garnered more than 250,000 signatures because having been approved by NICE in Scotland, it was then rejected in England. So we've been campaigning very hard to get that one through, and we are at the point where NICE has sort of stepped back and is now trying to continue negotiations with the drugs companies. We very much hope that will have a good solution. So yes, we're always campaigning for specific things, but the issue about trials, most definitely, we are constantly approached by people saying, do you know of a trial? How do I find a trial? And what we are doing at that moment, there are a couple of smaller charities who very much focus on breast cancer research and trials. And so we refer to them for those specific circumstances, because you do have to focus on what you're good at, and you have to work collaboratively, not only with the NHS, but with the other charities out there. So that's what we do for those.
I mean, we were hearing the other day, of course, about things like the new liquid biopsies and so on. Do you feel optimistic about the future of breast cancer treatment?
It's interesting. Our CEO was Delith Morgan was interviewed on Woman's Hour earlier on this week, and she was asked that question. And the answer is yes, I think we do. The progress that we've made over the last 25 years has been fantastic. As I mentioned, we have an oncologist on our board, and he stood up the other day at a board meeting and gave this presentation and just showed the increase in life expectancy for women with breast cancer, and it has been absolutely fantastic. It's connected to lots of things, but the big things are drugs like tamoxifen and also Herceptin for HER2 positive patients. So there's a lot of that going on. So we are optimistic, and we fund as a charity £15 million worth every year of research. So we're spending a lot of money too, trying to find progress, and that liquid biopsy, some of our funded research has worked in that area. But there are, on the one hand, there's that, but then the other hand, what we worry about are the real basics, such as the screening program. The screening program is not up to target. It should be 70% of eligible women getting screened, and they're not. And so not only can we invest in groundbreaking research, but we can also back up what we've already got as a country. And what we're trying to do is put pressure on the government to have some form of increased awareness program about the screening program. Because probably everybody in this room knows about the screening program and probably will go. But there's a huge number of people out there that either just still don't know about it, or for some reason don't want to go, don't find time to go, can't go because it's inconvenient for them, and are just not taking up something that has made such a massive difference to survival rates. And that's really worrying.
And a lot of misinformation, I think, is attached to that. And I wonder actually how much time you have to deal with that. Of, the people who will swear that an apricot kernel is going to cure you of any form of cancer. It's getting worse and worse, the misinformation out there because of social media. How do you counteract that?
I obviously all the information that we provide is very carefully checked and written by clinical professionals, etc. So anything on our website we're absolutely 100% happy with, and we would always encourage people to avoid Dr. Google and come to us. But you're right, the alternative cures. I mean, when I was diagnosed, I was immediately told that I must avoid sugar at all costs, and it was definitely sugar that had caused it. I mean, you get these theories, they're always out there, always circulating, and in those dark moments when you're worrying about your future, you are prone to that, and you're going to be vulnerable to people offering what I might term a quack cure. So we just have to keep talking, we just have to keep saying to people, there are alternative things that may well work for you, but please listen to your doctors. Please don't not do what your doctors are recommending.
Yeah, it's that fine line, isn't it, between, yes, living a healthy lifestyle, because that's going to make your treatment hopefully a little bit more bearable.
Yeah.
But, yes, cutting out sugar, is not going to do anything. Yeah.
Well, it didn't. No, I didn't think so, no.
When I was, as I said, having fertility treatment, the number of people who told me to just relax...
Easier said than done.
Automatically made you not relax.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it still didn't work. I wanted to ask, before I ask any more of my questions, is there anybody here who has a question you would like to put to Jill? I can't. We have, there's one here. We have a mic. If you could just say who you are and where you're from, that would be very helpful.
Hi, I'm Sarah Needham. I'm the Head of Innovation for the New Hospital Programme. Thanks very much for this session. I was diagnosed with breast cancer 14 months ago. I had fantastic care in the NHS, but yes, my treatment was delayed because of COVID. I also run the vaccination programme in North Central London, and we also had a huge impact of disinformation about taking up vaccines. We now know that the BME community also, there's a massive amount of disinformation about going to screening. What can we do collectively to support people going to these for screening to save lives?
You're absolutely right. And one of our areas of focus has been definitely on communities who wouldn't ordinarily have a lower rate of breast cancer, but because they are presenting later in their journey, are getting much worse outcomes. And that is partly because you're so right, they're not going for screening in the numbers that they should. I mean, we are working those areas. We're also working collaboratively with other charities such as Black Women Rising to try and understand what the problems are and why people are susceptible to the stories and to the misconceptions about screening. So we are also investing as part of our research spend into inequality projects to look at ways that we can improve those scenarios and improve those outcomes.
Just one more question. I also want to know if you're doing any work to improve the knowledge base on the treatment of lobular carcinoma in situ. That's the cancer I had. There's very limited knowledge on treatment, particularly if they're spread into the lymph nodes, and the outcome's very poor. So I'm just wondering, is that something you're doing to try and get investment to improve research in that area? Thank you.
Lobular cancer, forgive me, I'm not a scientist, so forgive my knowledge, but it is normally estrogen positive linked. So is that right?
Yeah, but it's plaques of cancer. It's like sheets, so
Yeah.
it's very difficult to detect.
Yeah. So our current research programs have not got anything specifically in that area. Though a lot of the research we've done in the past on the estrogen side of things will have indirectly helped lobular. So the honest answer is there's nothing in our research program as such at the moment, but clearly every time we do a call for research funding, we are looking across the remit to look for where we can have the most impact. And it's obviously an incredibly difficult decision to make as to where we direct our research funding, because there are so many areas that we could go into and we have relatively limited funds.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Just while you're thinking, if you have any, I wanted to ask you about help for people living with cancer.
Yes.
Because that's something that's often not talked about, you know, and with treatments getting better, people are lasting longer, and how do you go about talking to them about that?
Yeah. I assume you're talking about secondary breast cancer. Yeah. We estimate there are about 61,000 women in the UK currently living with secondary breast cancer, and that can be any number of years after that diagnosis. We run a number of courses specifically for those women. We have something called Living with Secondary Breast Cancer, as the clues in the title, and also we have one very specifically for younger women with secondary breast cancer. So those work, pre-pandemic they were in person, and we would gather those women together to meet up physically for a 2-day course, sort of once a year, and having made those relationships, people tended to continue themselves. We're going for a bit of a hybrid model. We have gone back to some of the face-to-face courses, but we do have things online, which sometimes works better anyway if you are living with secondary breast cancer, because your life is one constant rotation of appointments and scans, and sometimes you're really, really well, and sometimes you're less so. So we do it that way as well.
Do you think that we were talking about earlier about misinformation, but do you think that there is generally a better understanding, particularly of breast cancer, because there is so much more attention paid to it than some of the other lesser known cancers?
I think in the last 25 years, I mentioned that Delith was talking on Women's Hour. I mean, she said that 25 years ago it was kind of the unseen epidemic because people didn't talk about it, and they were, somewhat embarrassed to refer to the fact they had cancer. And I think certainly in most communities that has gone away. There are elements where that still exists and that is still a problem. But yes, I think it is much better known about. People are more willing to talk about it. People go through a process, they are pretty much cured, and therefore they can go back to a normal life. But it hasn't gone away. We still are losing 11,500 women a year to breast cancer. That is a lot of people dying from something that we would like, as a charity, to stop. So yes, we know more about it, and yes, more people are getting it. So it's an issue that's being talked about, but it's still a huge issue.
Any questions? Yes, one here.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your support for men and breast cancer, because they have testicular cancer, prostate cancer, but you never hear them talking about helping men detect breast cancer, and it's very isolating for them.
I completely agree with you. About 350 men a year are diagnosed with breast cancer, and ironically, my male cousin is one of those. And you're absolutely right. Not only are they a lot of people unaware of the fact that they can get breast cancer at all, so they're not looking for symptoms. But once they do have it, it's incredibly isolating because it's not a disease that men feel comfortable about admitting that they have. And also the treatments for it, particularly tamoxifen for men, is really difficult to endure, and a lot of men will therefore not continue with the treatment and are much more susceptible to it coming back as secondary. And it is far more men proportionally are dying of their breast cancer than women are, partly because it tends to be more difficult to deal with, and partly because of difficulties with it, dealing with the treatments. In terms of how we deal with it, we very much specifically have contacts and groups for men. We do an annual fashion show, which is something that Breast Cancer Care were doing for years. I don't know if any of you've seen it, but if you ever get the chance to look at our YouTube videos of it, it's really inspiring. We have people with breast cancer who, for one day only, are fashion models. The clothes are provided. We have this amazing catwalk, the lights, the music, everything. We have makeup, we have hair. They come and they do 3 or 4 rounds of fashion shows, and we have 3 or 4 men who do it as well. And it is just the most, oh God, it's really emotive. It's really tear-jerking, but it's so empowering and it's fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen it. It is amazing. Listen, thank you so much for your time. I wish you luck in getting more trusts on board. I hope if there are any leaders in the NHS leaders in this room that you're listening to this.
Yep.
And really thank you for your time. It's fascinating.
Thanks
and
so much.
Good work. Yes. Could you please thank Jill Thompson?